Let's be honest, without filters and without the lies you tell yourself. How many tabs are open in your mind right now? Not on your computer. Inside your head, one tab for work, another for a sexual fantasy that's been chasing you since morning, a third for the voice of self-criticism that won't shut up, a fourth for the infinite feed of a social network. Even with the phone in your pocket, your attention is fractured, jumping from one point to another like a startled animal, never landing, never deepening, never at peace. You wake up, and the first thing your hand reaches for is the screen. You go to bed, and the last light your eyes see is that of a device. And in the middle of the day, in that brief moment of boredom or discomfort, where do you run? To the same digital refuge. To one more click, one more image, one more video, one more quick relief that promises everything and delivers nothing. You call this freedom. The freedom to choose, to consume, to satisfy any impulse the moment it is born. But I am here to tell you that this is not your freedom. It is your cage. An invisible cage with no iron bars, but whose walls are made of your own uncontrolled desires. You have become a slave. A harsh word, I know, but look at the facts. A master decides, a slave reacts, and your life has been one long, exhausting series of reactions. A stimulus appears on the screen. You react with a click. Anxiety tightens its grip. You react with an escape into pornography. Loneliness hits. You react by begging for attention in a messaging app. You are not in command. You are a puppet, and the strings moving you are your own impulses, amplified by a system designed to keep you exactly like this, weak, docile, and consuming. And the energy that fuels this puppet, it is your life force, your potency, your sexual energy, what the great Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung called libido, not just carnal desire, but the fundamental psychic energy, the fire that drives a man to create, to build, to lead, to leave a mark on the world. And you, what have you been doing with this fire? Have you been using it to forge a life of meaning? Or have you been using it to burn yourself out, night after night, in a silent cycle of pleasure, emptiness, and guilt? That feeling of tiredness that doesn't improve with sleep, that lack of clarity that prevents you from making firm decisions, that brutal difficulty in concentrating on a single task for more than 10 minutes. This is not normal. This is not just how men are. It is the symptom of a soul that is being drained. It is the consequence of a man whose most sacred energy has been hijacked and now serves a cruel master. The immediate impulse, pornography, compulsive masturbation, the incessant search for online validation, gaming addiction, these are not separate problems. They are different heads of the same hydra. They are the symptoms of a single disease, a powerful energy that has been trapped in the basement of your psyche, never being called into the light, never being integrated, never being given a mission, and an energy of this magnitude, when it is not used to build, inevitably begins to destroy. In this video, we are going to go down to that basement. Armed with the lanterns of Carl Jung's deep psychology, we will look at this force not as a monster to be slain, but as a wild and powerful animal that must be tamed. You will understand that repressing your desire is futile. It will always find a way to escape, whether in dreams, in slips of the tongue, or in outbursts of anger. The way out is not repression. It is transmutation. You will learn that the path to stop being a slave is not to fight against your impulses, but to look at them, understand them, and give them a new direction. You will discover that the same energy that drags you down to mediocrity today, when channeled correctly, is the only force capable of catapulting you to greatness. This is not a conversation about morality or sin. It is a conversation about power, about who sits on the throne of your life, you, your conscious and purposeful self, or your primitive desires, fed by an impersonal algorithm. The journey from slave to master is the most important journey a man can make. It is the way back home, to your center, to your axis. It is the process of gathering all the parts of yourself that you have projected outward into fantasies, into obsessions, into people, and bringing them back inside, forging a whole, unified, and unshakable human being. If you are tired of being a plaything in the hands of your own impulses, if you feel, in the depths of your soul, that you were born for something more than this cycle of distraction and exhaustion, if you are ready to stop running and start building, then this message is your call. The journey to reclaim your power begins now. The path out of this invisible cage demands more than information. It demands a conscious decision. If you are truly determined to begin the journey from slave to master, your first act of power is simple. Subscribe to the channel. It is your declaration that, starting today, you stop reacting and start building. Your decision to subscribe was the first step in bringing the light of consciousness into the darkness that governs you. It was your declaration that you refused to remain a slave. Now, for liberation to be possible, we must illuminate the root of the problem. Let's understand the exact mechanism by which your life force has been stolen from you. Every day, with your unconscious permission. To do this, we must use the lens of one of the greatest doctors of the soul who ever lived, Carl Jung. The first thing you need to understand is the word Jung used to describe this energy, libido. Forget the superficial definition you know. For Jung, libido was not just sexual desire, it was much more. It was the totality of your psychic energy. Think of it as the electricity running through the wiring of your soul. It is the force that drives you out of bed in the morning, the force that fuels your ambition, the energy you use to concentrate, to create, to love, to fight. It is your will to live, in its purest, rawest form. This energy, in itself, is neutral. Like electricity, it can be used to light up a city, or to power an electric chair. The power is the same. The direction is everything. And this is where the drama of the modern man begins. Jung identified a fundamental psychological mechanism called projection. Projection is the unconscious act of taking a part of yourself, a desire, a quality, a power, and throwing it outward onto an object or person. When a man is not conscious of his own power, of his own value, of his own center, his libido, his vital energy, does not stay still. It becomes like a hook, desperately searching for something external to latch onto. It needs a container, a target, and the modern world is an infinite banquet of targets. Think of pornography. What is really happening there, from a Jungian perspective? A man projects his own anima, his internal ideal of the feminine, his need for connection, beauty, and wholeness onto pixelated anonymous images. He pours his psychic energy, his sacred libido, into a digital abyss. He is not just masturbating, he is trying, in a desperate and distorted way, to connect with a lost part of himself that he has projected onto a screen. He empties himself, trying to fill a void that only grows with every click, because the source of the fullness he seeks is inside him, not outside. Think of social media. A man spends hours observing the lives of influencers, athletes, celebrities. He projects his own unlived hero archetype. He invests his energy admiring another's success, instead of using that same energy to build his own. Or he projects his shadow, his frustrations and angers, to political arguments with strangers, wasting his potency on battles that cannot be won and that do not nourish his soul. Think of obsessive infatuations. He meets someone and, instead of building a real connection, he projects onto her the image of a goddess, the savior who will finally make him happy and whole. He hands her the key to his own happiness. His libido is no longer centered in him. It is orbiting around another person, making him needy, reactive, and energetically dependent. Do you see the pattern? With every projection, a piece of your soul is outsourced. You become energetically fragmented. A part of your strength is trapped on a porn site. Another part is on a model's profile. A third is in the comments section of a news portal. You are no longer a unified, sovereign being. You are a psychic patchwork quilt, with your energy scattered across the digital and emotional realm. And a fragmented man is, by definition, a weak man. This is why you can't concentrate. How could you? Your army of mental energy is dispersed across 10 different, useless battlefronts. This is why you feel chronically exhausted, even without physical effort. Keeping all these projections active, feeding all these external hooks, is a Herculean and completely invisible psychic task. You are bleeding energy from 1,000 small cuts, and, most tragic of all, this is why you lose your internal authority. A man whose life force is constantly projected outward loses the ability to feel his own center. He becomes dependent on the external world for everything, to feel validated, to feel excited, to feel alive. He stops being a sun, which generates its own light and heat, and becomes a dead planet, which depends on the light of other suns to keep from freezing. He becomes easy to manipulate, easy to control, easy to sell anything that promises to fill the void he himself created. This is the anatomy of your slavery. These are not iron chains. They are threads of projection, and you have woven them yourself, unconsciously. Every time you sought outside the power that already resided within, Carl Jung did not give us this diagnosis to condemn us, but to liberate us, because the first step to reclaiming your power is to understand exactly how and where you are giving it away. And now, you know. I know the concept of projection can be deep, but the feeling is familiar to all of us. It's that feeling of having your mental and emotional energy hooked by something or someone outside of you, leaving you drained. Bringing this dynamic from the unconscious to the conscious is an act of courage, and this space is for that. So, the reflection I invite you to make is this. Looking at your life today, what would you say is the main thief of your energy? Where do you feel your life force is being most projected and wasted? There is no wrong answer, only honesty. The comments are our laboratory for by sharing your main energy drain, you can help another man identify his. Share your insight down in the comments. With a brutal honesty, you named the thieves of your energy. The screens, the fantasies, the incessant search for validation. But now, we must ask the most dangerous question of all. What if these thieves didn't break down your door? What if you invited them in yourself, opened your home, offered them a feast, and worse, handed them the master key, believing that this gesture was your greatest act of freedom? Herein lies the most ingenious and perverse trap set for the modern man. We have been seduced by a definition of freedom that is, in fact, the most sophisticated form of slavery. We were taught that freedom is the absence of limits. It is having unrestricted access to everything, at any time. It is the ability to satisfy any impulse, the very second it arises. Freedom, they told us, is having 1,000 options in the palm of your hand. But this is the freedom of the addict, not the master. It is the freedom of the child who wants to eat candy until he gets sick, not that of the king who rules his own kingdom. Carl Jung warned about this nearly a century ago. He knew that true freedom is not the absence of external limits, but the presence of a strong, unshakable inner center. A man with 1,000 options but no internal compass is not free. He is simply lost in a bigger, noisier maze. True freedom is not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom from being forced to do what your lower impulses demand. It is sovereignty over oneself, and the culture of constant stimuli was designed to destroy exactly that sovereignty. You don't realize it, but you have been conditioned. Like in Pavlov's experiments, you have been trained, day after day, to respond to invisible bells. The bell rings a feeling of boredom, of anxiety, of loneliness, and you salivate. Your hand automatically reaches for the phone. You click, you scroll, you see an image, you feel a dopamine hit, the reward. The cycle repeats hundreds, thousands of times. What was once a choice is now a reflex. The space between stimulus and response, The precious space where your will and your consciousness should reside has been eliminated. You are no longer choosing your actions. You are executing a program that was installed in you, a program that says, when you feel discomfort, seek immediate relief. When you feel empty, fill it with stimuli. When you feel desire, discharge it in the quickest and easiest way possible. And by obeying this program, you disconnect from the only real source of power you possess, your center, your soul, what Jung called the self. Jung taught that the self, your deepest and most authentic self, does not scream, it whispers. It communicates through intuition, through meaningful dreams, through the feelings that emerge in the silence. But how can you hear a whisper if you live in the epicenter of a hurricane of notifications, videos, music, and opinions? The culture of constant stimulation is, in its essence, a signal jamming device. It is an infinite white noise designed so that you can never, ever hear the voice of your own soul. And what happens to a man who no longer hears himself? He becomes a surface man. He begins to live entirely on the periphery of his own psyche, reacting to the winds of the external world. His identity is shaped by the likes he receives. His emotions are dictated by the content he consumes. His convictions are an echo of the latest trends. He has no axis, no depth. He becomes hollow. And that is why, despite all the apparent freedom and all the access, the modern man is so fragile. Because when a real-life storm hits him, a job loss, the end of a relationship, an existential crisis, he shatters, for there is nothing inside him to hold on to. The house was built on the sand of instant gratification. This false freedom gave you infinite options, but it stole your ability to make the only choice that matters, the choice to be who you truly are. It gave you access to all the pleasures of the world, but it cost you the deep joy that is only born from purpose and discipline. It promised you a world without limits, and in the process, it left you without a center. You are free to wander a prison whose walls expand infinitely, but from which you can never escape, because the key has always been on the inside, and the first step to finding it is to dare to turn off the noise, face the silence, and begin to listen. Recognizing this false freedom is the first step to reclaiming the true one. If this analysis helped, you see the invisible bars of the cage. Your like is more than just a click. It is an act of consciousness, a signal that you are choosing to get off autopilot. And it helps this message reach other men who are still searching for the door. So you've turned off the noise. You've looked at the bars of your cage of convenience and you've acknowledged them. And now, in the uncomfortable silence that settles in, the most important question of all emerges from the depths of your soul. Now what? What do I do with all this restless energy, with all this desire that I used to numb with distractions? The answer, my friend, is not in fighting this force. It's not in repressing it with more violence. It's in performing alchemy. The ancient alchemists sought to turn lead into gold. The modern world laughed at them, calling them mystics and dreamers. But what our arrogant era failed to understand is that their laboratory was not external. The lead was not a metal. It was human nature itself, in its rawest, heaviest, most instinctual state. And the gold, the gold was the awakened man, the conscious being, the master of himself. Carl Jung revived this wisdom. He understood that transmutation is not a medieval fantasy. It is the most important and real psychological process a human being can undertake. It is the journey of transforming raw desire into creative power, focus, and discipline. Let's step into this laboratory and learn the process. The first thing an alchemist needs is his raw material, the lead. For us, this lead is your desire in its crudest form. It's the agitation, the lust, the anger, the frustration, the neediness. It is all the heavy, chaotic energy that bubbles inside you. The energy that society has taught you to fear or to discharge as quickly as possible. The alchemist, however, does not throw the lead away. He sees it as a treasure. He knows that within that dense, dark matter, The potential for gold is hidden. The second element is the alchemical vessel, the container where the transformation happens. This vessel is your own consciousness, your body, your attention. The first rule of alchemy is, nothing can leak. You must learn to contain the energy, to keep the lead inside the vessel. This is why practices like semen retention are so powerful. They are literal training for this principle, but it applies to everything. Containing your anger instead of exploding. Containing your neediness instead of begging for attention. To contain is the act of creating the sacred space where the magic can happen. The third element is the fire. The fire is your discipline, your willpower, your directed focus. It is the heat of your consciousness that you apply to the raw material. It is the act of sitting down to work when everything in you wants to flee. It is the act of meditating when your mind screams for distraction. Without the fire of discipline, the lead remains lead forever. With these three elements, the raw material of desire, the vessel of containment, and the fire of discipline, the true alchemy can begin, and it happens in stages. The first stage is confrontation. This is the most difficult moment, where most give up. It's when you put the lead in the vessel and light the fire. The raw energy, now contained, begins to stir violently. Desire screams, anxiety burns. The mind projects every possible fantasy and excuse to get you to open the vessel and release the pressure. This is the moment the urge strikes. And here, your only task is to apply the alchemist's first technique, the conscious pause. You do not give in. You do not fight. You simply observe. You breathe and you face the force of your own desire, without identifying with it. You acknowledge it, but you refuse to be its slave. You are heeding the lead, enduring the heat, trusting the process. Once the initial confrontation is overcome, we enter the second stage, purification and redirection. The raw energy, heated by the fire of your attention, is now malleable. It needs a direction, a new channel. This is where you apply the second technique, active redirection. You must give this energy a new job. If it was screaming for sexual pleasure, you channel it into a brutal physical workout. Feel the energy that was in your mind move down into your muscles, transforming lust into strength. If the energy was anxiety, sit down and channel it into creative work or complex problem solving. Feel the mental agitation transform into laser focus. Energy follows attention. By giving it a higher task, you purify it. You are washing the lead, separating the pure potency from its compulsive, addicted form. Finally, we arrive at the third stage, integration, the creation of gold. This happens when the process of redirection stops being an emergency and becomes a habit, a lifestyle. It is the application of the third technique, constant, purposeful action. Day after day, you take your vital energy and instead of allowing it to leak or stagnate, you consciously invest it in your mission. Every choice, every task, every interaction becomes an act of alchemy. The energy that once enslaved you in cycles of pleasure and guilt is now building your legacy. And what is the gold that results from this process? It's not a bar of metal. It is a new kind of man. It is the man who possesses the gold of unshakable focus, able to dive into his work without being pulled by distractions. It is the man who possesses the gold of steel-like discipline, whose will is no longer a leaf in the wind of his impulses. And above all, it is the man who has awakened his creative power, the ability to take the energies of his inner world and manifest a reality of value in the outer world. This is the forgotten art. It is not about denying who you are. It is about taking all the parts of yourself, especially the darkest and heaviest ones, and using them as fuel for your ascension. You have the laboratory, the raw material, and the fire. The great work of your life is not to build a career or a fortune. It is to build yourself, and the journey from lead to gold begins now. In the alchemist's laboratory, we learn the process of turning lead into gold, desire into discipline. But to become a true master, It is not enough to just know the technique. You must know the nature of your raw material in depth. Where does this lead come from? Where are these raw impulses, these dark fantasies, this wild force that both frightens and fascinates you born? Carl Jung's answer to this question is one of the most powerful and dangerous ideas in psychology: the shadow. Forget the childish notion that the shadow is simply your bad side or the devil on your shoulder. That is a simplification that keeps you weak. The shadow, in truth, is the home of everything you have repressed, denied, and hidden in order to be accepted in the world. It is your personal ark of banished treasures. Inside, you will find, yes, your lust, your aggression, your envy, but you will also find your raw strength, your wildest ambition, your untamed creativity, your primal intuition. The shadow is the wild man who lives in the basement of your psyche. Chained since childhood, when you learned that to be good, you had to be docile, polished, and predictable, the modern man, in his desperate search for acceptance and comfort, has declared war on this part of himself. He tries, at all costs, to be only light. He dresses himself in the persona of the good guy, the competent professional, the controlled man. But Jung gave us a solemn warning: what you resist persists. The shadow, when ignored, does not disappear. On the contrary, it grows stronger in the darkness, feeds on your fear, and inevitably begins to rule your life from behind the curtains. And how does it do this? In ways you don't even notice. The first symptom of an unintegrated shadow is projection. You begin to see your own repressed lead in everyone else. You hate the arrogant man at work because he is living the ambition you locked in your basement. You harshly judge the sexuality of others because your own sexual energy is chained and starving. You point the finger at the world, not realizing you are only describing the parts of yourself you refuse to face. You become a hypocrite, and your life fills with conflicts and resentments that seem to come from the outside, but are just the echo of your internal civil war. The second symptom is self-sabotage. This is the shadow acting as a double agent with your conscious mind. You set a goal. I'm going to wake up early. I'm going to stop watching porn. I'm going to start my project. But the wild man in the basement, who has never been heard, who has never been given a job, rebels. And it is he who, in the moment of decision, convinces you to hit the snooze button, to open the incognito tab, to procrastinate one more day. You blame yourself for your lack of discipline, without understanding that you are not fighting against laziness, but against the powerful part of yourself that you have turned into an enemy. The final result is slavery. A man who does not integrate his shadow lives in a state of constant fear. Fear that the wild man will escape the cage, and because of this, he lives a small, controlled, gray life. He never truly risks, never truly loves, never truly leads, because he fears the intensity of his own strength. And ironically, the more he represses, the stronger the shadow becomes, until the day it breaks down the door in an explosion of rage, in a compulsive addiction, in a crisis that destroys everything the good guy persona has built. But there is another path, the path of the master. The path of integration. The master does not seek to kill the wild man. He descends into the basement, not with a sword, but with a lantern and a peace treaty. He seeks to understand and, finally, to ally himself with this force. The integration of the shadow is the true alchemical process, and it begins with acts of courage. First, you must recognize your shadow. This requires brutal honesty. Take a notebook and ask yourself, what do I most despise and judge in others? What are my most secret and recurring fantasies, the ones that shame me? What do I secretly envy? Don't analyze. Just write. Bring the monsters into the light. The simple act of naming them already diminishes the power they have over you. Second, you must give this energy a conscious channel. You need to give the wild man a job. If you have repressed your aggression, channel it into competitive sports. into defending clear boundaries in your relationships, into the willpower to build your business. If you have repressed your sexual energy, transmute it into artistic creation, into passion for your mission, or into deep, present intimacy with your partner, instead of wasting it on fantasies. You don't kill the wolf. You teach it to pull the sled. It becomes your greatest ally, your source of power and vitality. Third, you practice internal dialogue. Instead of giving in to a self-sabotaging impulse, you pause and ask, what does this part of me really want? What is it trying to tell me? Perhaps the desire to procrastinate is actually a cry for rest. Perhaps the desire for easy pleasure is a yearning for true connection. By understanding the need behind the impulse, you can meet it consciously and healthily. Instead of letting the shadow choose the destructive path, this is the path to wholeness. A man who has integrated his shadow is not a saint. He is a complete man. He is dangerous, but for the right things. He has access to his fury, but uses it to protect. He has access to his lust, but uses it to create. He is no longer a fragmented being at war with himself. He becomes a unified center of power, with access to both the light of his consciousness and the fire of his primal nature. And a man like that, whole, can no longer be a slave. He becomes, by right and by conquest, the master of his own soul. We have reached the end of our journey today. But in truth, we are at the exact point where your true journey begins. We looked at the invisible cage of false freedom, dissected the mechanism of wasted libido, learned the steps of inner alchemy, and finally, faced the most feared and misunderstood of our powers, the shadow. The man who started watching this video, the one who perhaps recognized himself in the slave chained to his own impulses, no longer needs to exist. Slavery does not end with the death of the slave, but with his transformation. That reactive, fragmented, and drained being was not your true self. It was just a version of you, living in darkness, afraid of its own strength, governed by a part of itself it was never taught to know. The journey of integrating the shadow, the path of descending into the basement and making peace with the wild man, is what defines the passage from slave to master. The master is not a perfect man. He is not a saint without desires or a being of pure light. That is a childish fantasy. The master is a whole man. He is the one who has stopped fighting against himself. He recognized his aggression and transformed it into a protective and assertive force. He recognized his lust and transformed it into creative passion and magnetic presence. He recognized his greed and transformed it into a relentless ambition to build a legacy of value. He did not kill the wolf that lives inside him. He fed it, trained it, and transformed it into his most loyal and powerful ally. And a man who walks in peace with his own wild nature becomes a force of nature. This man no longer needs to react. His energy, once scattered in 1,000 projections, is now gathered at his center, creating a presence that is felt before he even speaks. His gaze is calm because he is no longer hunting for stimuli in the outer world. His decisions are firm because he is no longer at war with his own intentions. He no longer seeks the pleasure that numbs. He embodies the power that builds. He no longer flees from discomfort. He uses it as the fire for his forge. This is not a final destination, a diploma you receive. It is a daily practice. It is the conscious choice, in every moment of impulse, to apply the ritual of alchemy. It is the commitment to keep descending into your own basement with the lantern of consciousness. Not to judge what you find, but to rescue the treasures you yourself have banished. This is the great work, and it does not promise you an easy life, but it guarantees you a life worth living. If this deep journey we've taken together has offered you real value, and if you believe that this kind of conversation is a necessary antidote in a world of superficiality, consider strengthening our mission. The Super Thanks button is a way to transform your recognition into fuel, so that the flame of this quest can stay lit. I thank you from the bottom of my soul for your time, and for your courage to look into the darkness. If you refuse to live on the surface and feel the call to mastery, your place is here. Subscribe to the Neuro Alchemy channel and turn on notifications. You will not find easy answers, but you will find a community of alchemists willing to do the work to mark this moment. To seal your decision to begin this path, leave your decree in the comments. Write, "I integrate my power." Let this be your affirmation, your first conscious pact with the Master being born in you. Remember, the journey is long, but the direction is now clear. Until the next video.